Hi, this is Kai, and I would like to spend a couple minutes and go back over the innovation to launch model. One of the comments that has stood out to me over the course of this class has been the feedback you've given me on this work um, of trying to break down the innovation and startup process into this innovation launch model, and that it's been helpful for many of you to um, take a lot of the various pieces of this topic and maybe see how they are both complementary, unique, but also fit back together again. And it's certainly a big part of where the model came from was an effort to try and make sense out of what was an avalanche of information about innovation and entrepreneurship. And you may recall it was also part of the effort to reconcile the lean entrepreneurship world of design thinking, um, ideation, business modeling, lean thinking, and um, lean experiments, to reconcile that whole world with the more traditional world of writing a business plan, developing some financials, and going out and raising money to launch a business, the traditional start up a business type of ethos. And that innovation to launch helped me see the gap between those two worlds, the lean world and the traditional world, that was bridged by understanding how important that intermediate step looking at strategy was, as well as understanding that a lot of this work to create startups was missing the complexity and dynamics of the launch phase itself. Uh, and you may recall that I've broken that down into kind of three subcomponents through that tornado model of the early search effort, then the scaling, and then the stabilization process. So I've appreciated the feedback that you've given me, that that was a helpful model. And it's been encouraging to me, quite frankly, because I've used it for a while just to organize my own work and to help others design ecosystem projects. But your feedback was helpful there. And what I'd like to show you now is some additional work that I'm still doing. And I would invite you, if you have feedback on this, to let me know about questions or perhaps other ways that you might uh, take this information. So just a second, I'm going to pause the recording for a second while I switch over to a whiteboard. Okay, so hopefully you've got a whiteboard coming up here. And to just kind of get this started, you would recall that we've got the uh, six main parts of the innovation to launch model. That is ideation, modeling, strategy, planning, finance, and launch. And these are really, kind of iterative activities that on one hand build upon each other, but it's also not intended to be a linear progression along this line, that in many cases we kind of move ahead and then we back up and move ahead and back up. And even indeed, as we launch the business in that tornado model, and we're doing that early exploration, as we move to the scaling phase, we may loop all the way back around on this in terms of ideation and modeling and strategy around the scaling activities and then the later stabilization activities. So one of the things that I've vaguely mentioned, but I haven't put much emphasis on now, I want to bring into this model, is that I, for a long time, essentially had a early phase in here that I've referred to as basically ecosystem topics. So I basically got these numbered 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And I've been for a long time coding a lot of the work I do, with 0 being the actual ecosystem work, that is incubators, accelerators, startup studios, and the like. And I recognized over the last couple of years that all of this work that we do to become more creative and innovative really should not be left behind as a business launches and becomes stable and successful. But in fact, all of this work of creativity and innovation actually is transformed as businesses become stable into their quality management programs and ongoing continuous quality improvement. And so that's become basically 7 in here for continuous quality improvement. That becomes its own cycle of continual evolution for the business. And I think it's another piece that has been really lost in the focus for startups, is that all of the tools that are successful in startup thinking, like doing customer discovery, really need to be retained as the business develops and becomes stable. But those skills transition into traditional voice of the customer type activities that allow us to track customer satisfaction and improvement projects. And so the process of innovation and business improvement continues on down the line. So you now see the fuller picture of how I view this innovation to launch model, that is actually this ecosystem creates the potential and the opportunity. It becomes, in essence, a funnel filling effort of trying to create lots of different business opportunities, entrepreneurial ideas, just like in this class where you've explored a number of them. And when we do startup weekends and stuff, we have, could be, 100 ideas. We used to track it actually, but hundreds of ideas a year that are coming together. And just in the last year, if you consider the work you did with Arctic Innovation Competition, and there was the Innovation Summit, and there was the Alaska Angel Conference going on, and I'm missing another one right now. But there's close to 200 ideas going on. Well, that ecosystem is essential to feeding into this process then of building startups and moving through the ideation model, strategy, planning, financing type role, and then seeing businesses coming out the other end that now become stable, successful businesses. They're employing people, they're paying taxes, they're making money. But then over time, they continue with this continuous quality improvement of improving and extending their businesses and potentially moving out into new adjacent markets to grow their business in terms of either new products or new customers and markets. So what remains here that I've been, struggling with is, where do the founders fit into this? Are they just assumed to be kind of buried in this whole activity? Or do they deserve some special attention like I've given to some of these other areas of innovation? And that has led me to come to the conclusion that yes, founders need to be in this model, but they fit somewhat over top of the model, and they become basically a topic of focus and programming and support that kind of works over top of this whole activity. And so now we begin to kind of see a more complete view of the innovation ecosystem and startups and the players that are involved in that work. Arguably, mentorship and investors and other pieces are in there also, but now I think we really have the core part of a innovation ecosystem. We have the funnel filling of developing ideas from challenges and opportunities and problems. We're running that through a process that it searches for and develops validated business models and finds the financing and launches it, and then becomes successful businesses that over time continue to improve what they're doing. And we're taking care of the founders. And in fact, the founders, in many cases, come out this end of the process and they cycle back over here, picking up a new idea. And now we have serial entrepreneurship, where founders are really kind of a breed of folks that are really kind of the inventors or the artists of businesses, that just like an artist that does paintings or sculptures, they'll create something wonderful, creative, innovative, and new. But then once that's done and it moves on, they sell the art, whatever. In this case, they exit the startup. They come back and are ready to do more art. And I think there's a lot of cases where you can draw so many analogies between entrepreneurs and artists, because that level of creativity, and most importantly, that idea of doing something that's not been done before creatively, is really the paramount characteristic of a founder, and their ability to see a business model that no one else sees. I think of the idea of sculpture, and some of the sculptors would talk about the idea that within this large hunk of stone, they saw a masterpiece that was in it, and it was not their job to create it from the stone. It was their job to remove the extra stone that was covering up the masterpiece that was already in it. And I think there's a certain amount of that with founders that are trying to find, to chip away old models, old assumptions, old ways of doing things, to bring forth a new way of doing business that was there, but it needed to be set free, if you will. So let me try and put this all together now in terms of how I'm currently thinking of this, and I'm looking for your feedback and your suggestions down the road on what this might look like. And shoot, I was going to get a fresh page here. Let me save this page for a second, and then I guess I've got to erase this here. So just a second here while I. So the way I currently see this now is, and I'm sorry, I'm looking at a hand sketch. I've been wanting to write this down for you at some point, is if we start off with the right tool, got ideation, model, strategy, planning, finance, launch. And then over here, we've got this funnel filling of challenges, opportunities, and this then underneath it all has the ecosystem, innovation ecosystem, and startup communities. And over on this end, we have companies that are exiting out of this thing, but they have to continue with continuous quality improvement type activities. And I would argue that this startup ecosystem continues like I'm showing it here, underneath here, because this in essence becomes the space of open innovation. That is where startups and existing businesses are working back and forth on these continuous improvements and opportunities. And then over top of this, we have the founders that are moving innovations through this funnel and through the process of business creation and out to the business operations in here, and then potentially, as we talked about, circling back in there. And as I kind of wrapped up this model, then I was recognizing that the foundation for all of this work underneath here is a combination of agile processes and a notion of strategic doing. And these two things are kind of related concepts, but I think they're absolutely essential because they really are the underpinning of this whole model. Agile being this concept of taking large projects and breaking them down into small incremental steps that allow you to build and measure and learn very rapidly and very iteratively, as opposed to designing really large, massive projects with what would be typically referred to as a waterfall type of management, where you have a whole bunch of sequential gated steps. But in fact, agile allows you to do small pieces of it, kind of like eating the elephant one bite at a time. The other concept here, strategic doing, is a discipline around how you engage non-hierarchical based groups of people to do complex work. And it uses agile processes, but it's really about the notion of recognizing that highly complex systems don't have obvious, predictable cause and effect type results. And that is only by engaging and doing things that we begin to be able to move along a path that um, really replaces the old strategic planning process, uh, from the perspective that strategic planning always was kind of a systems-based approach that assumed causal, um, cause and effect type of efforts, that we could sit down and we could create a 3-year strategic plan, and that by um, planning certain things that were going to be done, that we would get certain effects as a result of that in terms of business growth, market share growth, whatever. As we've moved into the last 20 or 30 years, we've found evidence that that's just breaking down and doesn't work as well as it used to. Things are too complex. Doing long-term strategic planning typically fails. And it fails because we try and, if you will, try and eat too much of that elephant all at once, and don't appreciate all of the underlying complexities and uncertainties of the world. You can well imagine the simple example of the pandemic we've just been through. That if somebody had written a strategic plan, 18 months ago, it'd be a total waste, particularly if they had stuck with the strategic plan, never having anticipated this. The successful strategic planning process, doing process now, I think is essential to understanding this whole startup process, because the really successful strategic plans, if you analyze them and try and understand why do some work and some don't, they in essence have 3 key features. That is, the ones that work. Number one is they're clear on where you're going. They are clear in mapping out some process about how you're going to try and get there. But here's the key, is that they get there by taking many small steps and learning along the way, as opposed to mapping out huge gargantuan projects and then waiting to see if they become successful later. So strategic plans, again, clarify where you're going, clarify how you're going to get there, and then break that down into many small or agile type processes that allow you to take steps, build, measure, learn, and iterate on the results that you're getting over time while you do that. So that's the foundation. And over top of this thing, and I'm not sure I've got this in the right order here, but I think over top of this whole ecosystem is curiosity and imagination. That kind of fuels the process of people thinking new and differently about that. And finally, that process in itself, I believe, is driven by fundamentally challenging and engaging questions and curiosity. I just realized I got curiosity in 2 places. What did I do? Oh, I see. This is creativity. So it's questions and curiosity drive creativity and imagination. That inspires and drives founders. Founders pull things through this process of challenge, through the innovation and launch model, to ongoing continuous quality improvement. And this is all supported by methods that are engaging an innovation ecosystem and using agile processes to take the meaningful steps along the way. That almost seems like maybe it's too complicated, but maybe it helps pull together a lot of pieces. It does for me. I do still struggle and experiment around with the pathway between curiosity, creativity, and imagination. If you dive into those terms, the thinking and the philosophy behind them, you'll find out that they're unique, but they overlap in areas. But I am currently driven by the idea that if we don't have curiosity and don't ask questions, that we don't move into the space of trying to be creative and trying to use our imagination to try and sort out those questions and to imagine those things that we're curious about, and that those are necessary traits and aspects of what motivates a founder, and that with that motivation, they then have the discipline and the passion and the persistence to move things through that pathway from left to right in the middle, supported by an innovation ecosystem that provides them access to all of the services, the support, the mentors, the programming that they need along the way, because each one of those steps requires there being different kinds of community programs and resources available to them. And that underlying that then is this approach of agile, iterative advancement along the path of connecting where we're going and how we're going to get there. I'd love any thoughts you have on that. Questions, a piece that doesn't fit, or something that strikes you as interesting, or come back at me with maybe how you'd restack this in a slightly different way that you think makes sense. I'd love to see your feedback on this. Thanks.